You know, if we look at this thing in a very simple way, which I think we see in many of the popular press articles, there's two fairly obvious solutions. One is the retailer, the buyer, can say, yes, I realize that it's going to cost the factory a little bit more per unit piece to manufacture at these standards. I'll pay the price. I'll take the hit on my bottom line. That's one option. Another option might be, well, I know the factory's going to have to make some capital investment to get their facilities up to standard. I'll provide some of that capital or arrange for the financing for some of that capital. What are the implications of that? So, what do you think? Is it that simple?
Well, I think it's not that simple, obviously. One, I think the cost number might be greater than people realize. One number that I found just in reading about this topic for personal interest was that meeting the ILO standards would cost around $3 billion if we did it countrywide in Bangladesh. That's a major expense. Now, what those standards are, how those relate to the standards that Dennis has been talking about, whether those are realistic, that's a whole separate question. But the investment is more than just a marginal increased cost per unit. It is a big number, potentially. Second, I think people think, well, why don't you just start running your own factories in Bangladesh or set up your own shop? That's a real difficult thing to do. I mean, there may be regulatory things in place that don't allow foreign companies to have ownership. Only around 5% of all the manufacturers in Bangladesh are foreign owned. So they're 95% domestic. And then it's difficult to manage a factory full of Bangladeshi workers from a different culture, different language, different legal structure, different political structure. It's just a lot harder to do. And you start to move down a very complicated road when you're saying, I'm going to be 25% owner. I'm going to have a 25% investment in your factory to ensure that you're meeting standards. That sounds great in an editorial, but it's really difficult to do in practice.
I think there's great points. I think there's another factor that we're looking at, and it's what I would call the productivity cycle. Because the reality is you may increase cost from a standpoint of raising standards. But at the same time, raising those standards may increase efficiency. You'll have less defectives, you can improve the flow of raw materials, et cetera. And there's a thing called productivity cycle that basically says that as you continue to get more efficient, your costs can go down and you continue to lower costs. And that's why the history within our own country, we've seen productivity dramatically improve and costs continue to decline. So as long as we're able to achieve increased productivity, we actually are in a position to be able to improve quality at a lower cost. And that productivity cycle actually provides lower cost. It does not negatively impact profitability. Maybe on a percentage basis, it goes down, but on a dollar basis, it goes up. So you have to look at that aspect of it because it does impact, and many companies do actually operate on what's called the productivity cycle process that lowers that cost but increases their overall volume, and they end up in a very big win situation, not only for the factory but also for the consumer.
Do any of the big retail buyers own either partially or fully any of those factories in Southeast Asia? What's their general position on that? My understanding is that they like to leave it kind of at arm's length.
My experience is that you try to develop long-term relationships with good factories that you're able to work with on a consistent basis and build up that volume and lower overall costs through efficiencies, which then enables you to have a great deal of influence and control with your overall productivity and production process without having to make the capital investment. And my experience is that that has proven to be a better business model than having to make the capital expenditures. There's also, in some countries, issues related to ownership of companies that can impact those decisions. But generally speaking, I would rather be able to influence a factory than rather have to put out the capital to own a factory.